You're listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military, sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get started with this week's episode, which is the other half of the Panjwai Podcast. You may remember from previous episode, we did one half of the Panjwai Podcast. We'll get to the other member of that podcast coming up here in just a few moments. But before we get started, just a huge, huge thank you to our listener and fan, Robert, for a very generous donation. We cannot thank you enough, folks. As we've told you repeatedly, this isn't like a business for us. We don't make any money off this thing. Whatever money we do make, we try to donate back to veterans charities. So when people donate to us, that helps us offset the costs for our production, our soundboard upgrades, everything that we're doing with Kill Cliff on our YouTube channel. All that stuff helps us out. So we can't thank Robert enough for his generous donation. Go to our website if you'd like to offer up a donation to us as well. We certainly appreciate it and are very grateful for you doing so. So thank you, Robert. Again, our social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground Podcast. Follow us there as well. And that links as well to our website, hazardground.com, which of course reminds you about our Amazon promotion on our website. You can click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. Do all your normal Amazon shopping. We'll get a percentage of what you guys spend, and then we donate that percentage back to some of the charities you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground. Also works from your smartphone, and it'll redirect you right to the Amazon app. So it's really convenient. All your credit card information is saved. So simple and an easy way to help out veterans across America just by going to hazardground.com. Don't forget about our Apple reviews. We've been reminding you guys, we need to see more of them. Please, please, please tell a friend who loves the show as well to go to Apple, leave us a review. You can also do that from your smartphone. Super quick, super simple. Doesn't have to be a lengthy review. Just something, giving us 5 stars, letting us know why you love the show. And who knows, maybe your review will be featured on our social media sites as well. So again, we certainly appreciate all the help from everybody. But this week's guest, former Army specialist who spent 4.5 years in the military and had 2 deployments, one to Iraq, one to Afghanistan. And the one to Afghanistan in the Panjwai province is what led him to join our former guest, Curtis Grace, and forming the Panjwai Podcast. And he is Luke Coffey joining us here on the Hazard Ground. Luke, welcome, man. And thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Excited to talk to the other half. And again, as we've said, nothing is really proprietary in the veteran space. We have no problem having on other podcasters. Your podcast is amazing. You're telling some amazing stories. Partly jealous about some of the stories you've been able to tell, because some of them are pretty impressive, to say the least. But it's great that we get sort of cross-pollinate here and have both you and Curtis on as the Panjwai Podcast team. So again, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we appreciate you carving out the space for having an episode for both of us. We feel lucky.
Absolutely. All right, start back at the beginning and tell us how and why you got in the Army.
So joining the Army was always just kind of a lifelong ambition for me. I mean, I was definitely that kid. I grew up on a farm in Kentucky, so surrounded by an agrarian community. So I was out throwing walnuts in the ditch lines, pretending they were grenades. And, the hay bales were my trench lines, just playing Army. And it was just always ingrained into something I wanted to do. And then I went to college for a year, and the classic story fucked that up. Oh, this is a cussing podcast, I hope.
That's okay. Yeah, you're good. Don't worry about it.
I went to college for a year, fucked that up, and then I flunked out horribly. And that's when that kind of childhood ambition, that teenage year ambition came back. And so I walked into the recruiter's office and signed up to be an infantryman, because that was the job that I wanted to do. If you're going to be in the Army, be in the infantry. That was kind of my mentality about it, because when you're a kid playing Army, you're playing infantry.
Yeah, no one's ever playing logistics.
Yeah,
where I ended up, but go figure. Anyway, so nobody tried to talk you out, being the fact that we were a nation in 2 wars, and Iraq and Afghanistan both raging at the time?
I think I was in the 7th grade when 9/11 happened. So my entire mantra of joining the military was pretty much ingrained into my family. Like I said, I took that little divergence, much to their relief, and then I went to the recruiter, signed the papers, and I came in. I was like, "Yep, joining the Army." So
how'd that conversation go?
It was one of those things where I think I knew better to cut that conversation off at the head before it began. So I signed my papers and then told them I was going in.
For a kid who played Army a lot, was basic training a struggle for you? Any surprises there?
Yeah, it was. I mean, honestly, I had a drill sergeant who framed it well. He said, "Is you get two gut checks when you're in the Army, but your infantry school and your first deployment." And so my first deployment was a little bit softer than most of it, but that's a different story. But basic training was kind of a gut check for me. I mean, I was young. I was just a freshly minted 19-year-old kid. Grew up, kind of in a bubble a little bit. And so to have that bubble completely shattered by some, backwater Louisiana drill sergeant just getting in your face was a little bit jarring. It took me some time to really adjust to being in and that kind of mentality in that world. But once I got into it and kind of hit my strides, it was a piece of cake.
Where did you end up after basic training in Fort Benning and infantry school?
So I got orders to go to Fort Stewart. Funnily enough, I joined hoping to go to Fort Campbell. So I had an airborne contract. And which I gave up because about halfway through basic training, I realized I didn't want to be in trade hawk any longer. And so when they asked people to give up their contracts to get there as quick as possible, I gave mine up. Ironically, I did that so I could go to Fort Campbell, hoping to be in Kentucky, where I'm from. Ended up going to Fort Stewart while the majority of the company went to Fort Campbell. Unbeknownst to me, you didn't have to have airborne to go there. So I was in Fort Stewart and I got sent to Bravo Company 164 and 2nd Brigade. And that's where I spent my entire 4.5 years in the same platoon.
Rock of the Marne, baby.
Yeah, the big blue and white striped weenie.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've as a Georgia Guardsman now, I spent enough time at Fort Stewart to live the life of a third ID individual. So look, all things considered, it's not a terrible place to go. I mean, yeah, the heat sucks in the summer and there's bugs and mosquitoes in the training. So, I mean, I get why people hate going there for 3 years, but all things considered, you didn't obviously spend much time there as you deployed twice in a 4-year span.
Yeah. I think I spent between training, like going to NTC and basic training and my deployments, I think I spent half of my career gone, and the other half was at Fort Stewart. But I was hot for 4.5 years. I never could escape the heat.
Yeah, that is true. Between Fort Stewart and the Middle East, there wasn't much respite from the heat.
Yeah.
So how long are you in it before you deploy in what, 2009?
Yeah, we deployed in October 2009. I got there in March of 2009. So I actually joined the Army. I shipped to basic training on election day of 2008. So I cast my vote, got in the van, and about a year later we deployed. I'd been in the unit maybe 8-9 months.
I mean, that's a quick turnaround, all things considered.
Yeah, and I was at the very tail end of that time when they had those locked in deployment schedules.
Right.
So I knew as soon as I got to the unit, we knew we were going to Iraq. We knew we were going to Mosul in the northern Iraq. We had our mission set, and we even got briefed months ahead of time at NTC. We were told, like, hey, sorry guys, you're probably not going to get your CIBs. You're probably not going to see any combat. It's really quiet, low key right now. I mean, this is in late 2009, 2010 when the withdrawal was happening, when Iraq was at that time fairly stable.
Yeah. I was there for the closeout in all 2011. So what were you doing up in Mosul?
So we just ran in your typical infantry operations, not a lot of high speed kinetic stuff like raids or anything like that. It was almost all anti-IED, counter IED operations. So we spent a lot of nights sitting in the desert looking through FLIR on Route Tampa. So that in combination with just kind of checkpointing, we set up and established checkpoints, pulled a lot of guard, just did presence patrols, nothing too crazy. The op tempo was pretty maddening. It was as heavy as it was in Afghanistan, but we just weren't getting in the thick of it,
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, was there a part of you who's sitting there in Mosul looking at the situation going, this isn't what I signed up for. This kind of sucks.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, that was kind of a crestfallen moment for some of the naive, E4s and below who were being told you're going to go, but you're probably not going to get your CIB. I didn't earn my CIB in Iraq. Sadly, we lost a couple of guys to an IED in the company, Lieutenant Robert Collins and Specialist Anthony Blunt. But that was such a unbeknownst thing at that time that it was kind of almost like a freak accident. I mean, obviously it was an intentional act on the enemy's behalf, but as far as combat was concerned, I think there was one firefight in the entire brigade. So yeah, we were all a little bummed out that we weren't able to get into the shit. So I got mine. I got what was coming to me.
Is it demoralizing? Were you one of those guys who was hard up for the CIB? Was that something that I mean, I know every infantryman is, but some guys take it in stride a little bit better. They're like, it is what it is. I mean, some people aren't hammered on awards and focused on badges and everything else, and some people are.
Well, I think, and this is something that Curtis and I have discussed a little bit on the podcast. It's like the CIB versus, say, a CAB or another citation. Like, I could give a shit about any of the other awards that the Army's given me. Either I feel like didn't deserve them, or they were just kind of giving out candy to make everybody feel a little better. But the CIB is kind of that coveted token of your infantry experience. It's the pinnacle. So it's
you're
not
naked without it.
yeah, exactly. And it's not an arbitrary side aspect of your job. It is the job. So yeah, it's to not get it, or I was definitely kind of hard charged for it. By the end of my deployment, I had pretty much accepted that the Iraq deployment, this was a 12-month deployment, the very tail end of the 12-monthers. I had pretty much accepted that I wasn't going to get that, and I'd kind of gotten over it, and I had decided I was not going to stay in the military, so I knew I would be getting out. And so I was basically just kind of slid into that mentality of just getting my time knocked out so I could get out and go back to school.
Wait a second. So you knew at that deployment you weren't going to stay in the military? Was it because of the deployment was boring, or you had other plans? I mean, what was the mindset?
I can tell you it was kind of a series of minor epiphanies. But one of the major epiphanies that kind of capstoned it all was sitting in a guard tower in August, 120 degrees, just outside of Mosul, in a little checkpoint. Living conditions were terrible. Watching people go about their daily lives, and I just I had that moment of like, okay, I'm not going to do this the rest of my life, because it was just that in combination with the other complexities of being in the infantry and being in the military was something that I just mentally, and I was also young, I don't think I had enough life experience in my belt. Like, all jobs have their shitty parts. But I'm glad that, I made that decision, because it's led to, a really fruitful life for me. But I think I just realized I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to do it. And so I just kind of knuckled down and knocked my time out.
Was this a sort of depressing revelation for a kid who played infantry and played Army his entire childhood existence? That
oh yeah,
didn't live up to the billing that you had thought?
I mean, for the kid and me who wanted to go out and play Army, you think playing, infantry sounds awesome. You go out and play Army in the woods and you shoot guns, stuff like that. My joke is that the Army takes the fun out of shooting a machine gun. I remember my first machine gun range when I got to the unit. And it was like, by the time I actually got down behind the weapon and started pulling the trigger, I was just like, yeah, this kind of sucks, because they've taken all the fun out of it. Because you're being babysat, you're being frog marched through these steps, you're being treated like an idiot. And so if I had found, yeah, exactly. You had a how many cadre, you couldn't even pull the trigger without somebody wiping your ass and telling you it was okay to do so. So that was just kind of a disheartening reality of the military, and it's never what anybody expects. I mean, that's a mantra, right? It's not what you expect it to be.
Yeah, well, again, I was in the on the tail end of the be all you can be days, and initially the experience didn't allow me to be anything. My career took a divergent turn, much like yours did. But that all aside, so you finish that deployment and you get back, and then how quickly again you turned around for Afghanistan?
So it was a long haul at that time, when everybody was going every year. It was 18 months before we went to Afghanistan. So we got back in October of 2010, and we went to Afghanistan in March of 2012. So it was a good long stretch of time, and it was just business as usual. Gunnery tables, train ups, Bradleys, tanks, nothing. There was rumor mills, of course, churning about Afghanistan, but everybody dismissed them until the few weeks leading up to when we got rumors, when the validity of those rumors became a little bit more apparent to us.
Now, wait a second. So you had signed, how long was your initial contract that you signed? 4 years?
4 years and 5 months.
Okay. So if you entered in 08 and you're deploying in 12, you're like, right at the end here. Were you like, hey, yeah, I'm getting out, I don't want to go? Or they said, no, you're going to go to the deployment? How did that whole thing transpire?
So this actually speaks to the inability of garrisoned military to maintain morale. They come down. I had a year left on my contract when we deployed, and they're like, "You're going to Afghanistan. It's going to be crazy." And we're all like, "Yeah, let's go." Let's get out of Fort Stewart for the year. So yeah, I think most of it, I was just kind of glad at that point. I mean, in retrospect, hindsight's 2020, right? But I was glad to catch the deployment. I was glad to have that we were going to get that experience. But I was just glad to get to do my job instead of having to slog it out for another year. But it was definitely in my mind, like, damn, man, I got a year left and I'm about to go into some thick stuff. And so, I mean, now we were there for 9 months. And I think from the last time I pulled the trigger in anger to the day I got out of the Army, it was about 60 days.
Really?
So,
Wow.
yeah. So it was a quick turnaround.
Another quick turnaround for you. All right. So when you're going to Afghanistan, you're going to be in the ship. Where exactly is this?
So we got word. Like I said, the rumor mill started turning really heavily in the fall. It went from being like we're going to like, hey, the S3 at Brigade said we're going, and so we finally got official orders to go in November, right before Thanksgiving. And so we went to Thanksgiving, came back, started switching gears. I mean, we were literally in the middle of shooting our last table of gunnery, so we went from like full blown mechanized infantry to switching gears to light infantry. We had change of command. Our company commander, Brian Kitching, who Curtis talked about, he came on, and we were just gearing up for this deployment. And it was it was very quick, very rapid change of mentality and pace. But we sorry, last train of thought. But we were ready to roll.
Any fears going into it? Any sort of apprehension, or is it one of that kind of excited apprehension that hey, I'm going to get my CIB kind of apprehension?
So I don't think any of us really knew what to expect until we got to NTC. So we went to NTC in February. So it'd been about a month before we deployed. And this is when we found out that our company was being detached from our mother battalion, who had basically just pulled COP security and FOB security at CAF. And we got sent out to Panjwai and attached to 123 Infantry. And when we knew that was going to happen, our platoon sergeant set us down, and he had this look on his face, this kind of like somber, really. And he's like one of these dudes, he's rock solid, consistent, always at that level of just being the old platoon sergeant, And he has this look on his face of just dread. And he's sitting there and he's telling us what we're about to step into. He's talking about the IEDs, how they're taking contact there almost every day. And he told us like we're going to lose guys and we're going to have guys get wounded. And that was the moment with a lot of gravitas for the platoon, because we all just kind of had this, oh shit, it's about to get real. And I think the platoon saw a real shift in mentality at that point. It went from being like, woohoo, we're going to Afghanistan, to we're gonna get in there and like we're gonna have to fight and get our job done. And none of us had a lot of frame of reference for that. I mean, there was like 2 or 3 guys in the entire platoon that had their CIB. So
all right, so when do you land in Afghanistan?
So it was about the 3rd week of March. I actually turned 23 on the plane to Afghanistan. So it was right around my birthday. That's an easy one to remember. So we got there. We went to Kyrgyzstan and Manas, and like a week of spin up last minute gear, getting plate carriers and that kind of thing. And I think we got to the actual COP at the very end of March.
Are you walking into this kind of thinking, I mean, obviously your antenna's up, but is it the whole we're not in Kansas anymore kind of deal?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we had that, we jokingly call it our come to Jesus moment at NTC. We had that moment where it was kind of that slap of reality. And, I was so laser focused on getting out that I knew I was going to go back to school. I had my goals set in place. I had my timelines, and we knew it was going to be thick and bushy. And when I went into it, I kind of created this mentality for myself. Like, this is not going to define me. I'm going to go there. I'm going to do my job. I'm going to get it knocked out. And then I'm going to get out of the military. I said, it's not going to define me. I'm not going to be the guy wearing the t-shirt going on podcast. I just had this really entrenched mentality of it not being the thing that defines my life. And so going into it with that mentality helped me kind of get into the rhythm of being there. I think with a little bit more readiness, mental readiness.
Day-to-day operations as you initially land there in the Panjwai district, what is it like?
So we ripped out pretty quick with the unit that we replaced. They had more or less stopped patrolling really far out from the base, or they had only gone to a couple of areas. I think they got into some bad shit, and they'd only been there a few months because the unit before them had gotten so fucked up that they had to replace them. And they were, I don't want to talk too much shit about them, but they were a little timid in their patrolling. So we just did rip patrols with them, and we basically just did big half moon loops out of the base and just big circles. And so it was that day-to-day grind, but we weren't really seeing contact. I mean, I think there's one day we started getting ICOM chatter that they were trying to push on us. So it was still a bit before we started getting into firefights. We only been there, we had to be there for 2-3 weeks before we started getting into firefights. So, but it was just the grind, man, the grind, just getting boots on the ground, walking around.
Your first firefight, how well do you remember it?
Vividly, because at the time, because I didn't have a frame of reference, I didn't realize how bushy and thick it was. It was a pretty gnarly one. I was actually out in the open. We we were big, long formation because we always had to walk in files because of the IEDs, which completely limited our movement. And so I was caught in the open between 2 points of cover. And I remember having this intrinsic gut thought, it's like, I want to pop a squat. And I popped a squat. And as soon as I did, PKM opened up and started ripping on us. And so I started hauling ass because I wanted to get behind some cover to the front. I pivoted, and about 70 meters to my 2 o'clock, I could see the distinctive V of muzzle pressure on a wall. So I just put, my scope on that, my ACOG on that, started squeezing trigger, probably dumped a mag. And then right around that time, we started getting hit from 2 other directions. 2 guys hopped out into an alleyway and started shooting directly at us. So bullets were snapping on the walls and the dust was kicking up, and you're getting that distinctive crack. And, they were opening up on us. The Navy dog handler was off to my right, and he was in the prone with his M4 underneath his armpit, just squeezing trigger, going, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, trying to push to cover. And so we suppressed them, and then some dudes topped out on a building, and we ended up putting them down, or one of those dudes down, and that kind of simmered it down. But it was a bad one. There was probably 4 or 5 dudes, and it was real thick, a lot of fire, and it was lasted a decent amount of time. I mean, for Afghanistan in the south, which is say like 2 or 3 minutes. It's not like the mountains where guys were battling all day or anything.
So when you look back on that experience, you kind of broke your cherry. Yeah, I mean, how much of that experience prepared you for the rest of the deployment?
I think at first it was kind of exciting, like it finally happened. And it is a little self-aggrandizing, but I was proud of how I handled myself because I got my rounds on target. I squeezed the trigger. I didn't hesitate. I was glad to see that I held up to that initial experience. Now, obviously you do that over and over and over again, and that attrition and mental grind becomes a little bit more steadfast in your mind. But yeah, it was cool to get to do that, but the excitement waned pretty quickly. By the time, even on the way out, we got hit one more time, and then the next firefight, and the next. And by that second or third firefight, I was like, okay, this kind of sucks.
Yeah, I guess in the whole concept of, hey, you get the CIB out of the way early, but there's also the somber reality that there's plenty more of these to come.
Yeah. I mean, after that initial, and we were the first platoon in the company to get hit. So we came back from the base and everybody was like, ooh, what was it like? And things like that. And then the following 2 or 3 weeks, everybody started getting hit. And then we launched a huge battalion-wide clearing operation out in the Horn, where we just pushed through the Horn of Panjwai with a bunch of other companies and cleared it out. In the middle day, as a 6-day operation, in the middle day of that, we lost our first guy, our first KIA, Sean Brazis, who was a Navy dog handler, the first Navy dog handler to actually be killed in combat. And,
how does that go down?
So I was actually to the south. So our unit was split up into 3 chunks. The 3rd platoon was kind of the main drive up to the north. And then to the south was our platoon. And then to the southmost point down in the river valley was our headquarters platoon in the trucks. And so it was one of those things in Panjwai where and this is generally a rule of thumb in Kandahar, especially down towards the western side of Kandahar. It's real thick. It's really close. It's not 400 or 500 meter engagements. You're talking 200 meters or under, sometimes as close as 15 or 20 feet away. And so somebody who's 100 meters to the north is having a completely different experience than what you're having to 100 meters to the south. So we're down there, scopes out looking for people, and 3rd platoon is getting in the thick of it. So 3rd platoon is where Sean got hit, and we were just kind of sitting there watching all this unfold, this drama with the Kiowas coming in and stuff like that. So I don't really have a lot, but we've covered it in the podcast, a couple of episodes of guys that were actually in that fight, and they brought a lot to light. That was really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, it doesn't necessarily hit home, maybe personally for you, because you weren't, within range of everything happening. But clearly conversations after that had to have centered around the reality of what had just happened.
Yeah. And that was probably one of the first times the 3rd platoon had gotten into a really thick firefight. They'd had their first firefight at that point, but that was the first like all out drawn out fight that they had, just a knuckle dragging fight. And I think the shift definitely happened in the following few weeks. We started losing guys left and right. And so The big wake up for me was when the engineers got hit. I was on the ground when they got hit, and that was our first IED strike. Up to that point, we'd always either found IEDs and bipped them, or the truck hit a couple small ones. But yeah, that was definitely the wake up for us too, and that's what really shaped our fight more than anything. In Panjwai, with like firefights, were manageable. You know, you have the illusion of control over the chaos. I can get behind cover. I can I can provide suppressing fire. I can get the Gustav online. But the IEDs, when we started hitting those things, man, that completely destroyed a lot of the fighting spirit in the guys, and it became a fight of survival and not necessarily this grandiose war.
What was the first one like, hitting that first IED?
So the first IED strike that I was witness to was when our engineers got hit. We were actually my squad was pushing down to link up with the rest of our platoon to bring them back into a patrol base. It's about a 3-day operation, and I was about 25 meters away, and they had stepped across a bridge to investigate a secondary suspected IED, and there was a second one in there that they didn't pick up on, and unfortunately one of them stepped on it and blew Trevor into a shit trench. And then Lily, he kind of got blown off the side of the road, and I was running the stall at that point. So I was on my way down to start rendering aid, and my team leader, wisely so, said, "Hey dude, like, stay here, pull security." Of course, me pulling security was sitting there watching this drama unfold, you know. And so I saw him pull, you know, the guys out and start treating them, and it was just you know, you could tell it was bad. You know, the nature of the wounds and the nature of the body language of Pinnock, especially of Trevor Pinnock. It was the only phrase that I can ever land on to describe it is you can read death on a person. And I could read death on him, and that was
stood out. Like, what do you mean when you say read death?
There's just something about their body language. There's something about the spirit in them is starting to wane. You know, you can see the drive to fight start to subside and to start to give way. And he stayed alive for a while. And you know, I think they even got him back to CAF, but it was hard. It's a hard thing to really describe. It's almost ineffable. But you know, you can just see it in body language. You can see it in, you know, their facial expressions.
Is there any part of you at this point in time that's like, I'm so close to the finish line and getting out, I got to get the hell out of here?
Yeah, man. I mean, that was always in my mind. I think honestly, the best thing for me, ironically, was getting out as soon as I got back. Because I think mentally, if I had to come back and still deal with stupid army shit for another, you know, 18 months after I got back or something, I think the will to drive to get it done and get the job done would have been decreased significantly. It was always on my mind, you know, but it's so strange. I can't really explain it, but I always, from the very beginning, I had this weird instinctual pit in my stomach feeling that I would be fine. I just always knew in the back of my mind I was going to make it.
Did your behavior ever change, or decisions like, hey, I'm not walking that way, or, you know, I mean, were you extra cautious about things, or that never entered your mind?
I mean, I was definitely cautious in that I understood the limitations of control that I could, you know, implement on a situation. So if I could drop a knee and get behind a wall, I was going to do that. I wasn't going to be the guy standing out in the open, because that was another thing about the nature of our fight. They always got the drop on us because they had freedom of maneuverability. They had a lot of good concealment with the thick vegetation of like the poppy and marijuana and the grape fields and the orchards and everything. So they always got the drop on us. We never got the drop on them. And so I was like, we knew a fight was coming. Instead of sitting out there with my head up, I would usually just kind of bunker down, get behind my optics, scan, and see what's out there. And then when shit would kick off, I'd at least be kind of mentally prepared and ready for it.
Well, even though you're out there looking for them, you really couldn't do anything until they shot first anyway, right?
No, I mean, yeah, we would see guys spotting us all the time. I mean, there's been more than enough times that I've had my rifle on a dude who's obviously spotting. You know, it's like a military-age male up on a grape hut looking out. You know, maybe he broke out of a radio or something, but we had to get permission to engage spotters. So, right. You know, but when you know it's coming, and it's aggravating to not be able to to drop the hammer on somebody is up to no good. But you can feel a change in the air, man. It gets staticky, gets wiry when the violence is about to get turned on.
Yeah. Were there any other, ticks or incidents that sort of stay with you as sort of seminal moments of this whole thing?
Yeah, certainly. And this is one thing that was kind of mind blowing, especially as we've done the podcast, and it's made this talking about these kinds of things a lot more easier for me. I mean, I was always the guy tight-lipped. I mean, when I went back to school, I'd go whole semesters and people didn't even know I was a veteran because I wanted, like I said, I didn't want it to define me. So I was never willing to openly share these kinds of things, but that's been the challenge of doing this stuff. But yeah, I think one of the natures of the deployment is like everybody had so many close calls. I mean, everybody's got a story, and not just one, but like multiple. And so I've had a few. I mean, you have the classics, the zip of the bullet over your head, or the smack of one on the wall. A couple. The one that really stands out to me the most was a very, very close ambush. I was completely exposed. My six was completely exposed. I was up on a wall pulling security for another unit, and we didn't know that these guys were maneuvering around behind us. And a dude got a PKM up on a wall probably about 15 meters away, and he just unleashed an entire belt on me. And I don't know how I survived it. I spun, dropped to the prone, and I just started gunning on him too. I could see that dust kicking up. I mean, there was bullets cracking, and branches from the trees were falling on top of me, and the leaves were just going everywhere, and the ground was getting chewed up. And one round actually hit so close to my face that it sprayed dirt up into my face. And even like I had my finger, I was actually on the saw again, and it was so close that I flinched, but I never took my hand off the trigger. I have this distinct memory of like the saw going just like that as I was just laying down on that dude, just like he was on me. And we had this little back and forth for a moment, but yeah, getting that dirt sprayed up on my face where I could taste the acridity of it was that's always stuck with me. And that's one of those moments where like that's definitely the closest I came to getting killed, and I don't know how I made it out on the other end without getting killed. I can't figure it out, or at least getting shot.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up that story, it just reminds me of a firefight that I was in the middle of Baghdad, and I remember as I was moving and running, like I felt something pop up, and bullets are whizzing by. You don't really know how close they are until they're like super close.
Yeah,
they're close.
Yeah,
because you can hear them, like you said. There's pops and there's whizzes, and then there's like danger close where you got to check your drawers to make sure everything is still where it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But I remember while I was moving and running to go get cover, something bounced up, and I remember something hit me right in the neck, and I thought that it was a round, like it hit me with enough force to sort of turn my body as I was running. And I'll never forget the feeling. And I'm sitting there like doing this. I'm like, I'm hitting like, and I'm looking at my hand, my glove to see if there's blood on. There's little red specks like of blood on it. It's like it's either rock or a piece of shrapnel that got like deflected, but it came up and hit me. But it's just one of those things where, you remember that so vividly that it's that moment is sort of crystallized in your mind.
Oh yeah, I mean those close calls get, they get ironed into the deepest recesses of your mind. It's like I mean, if I got dementia one day and was lying on my deathbed, I still think I could probably remember that. So it's there for a while,
Was there ever a point where all the casualties got to so high that you're sitting there having conversations with your fellow platoon mates or whatever, saying, "Man, I don't think we're going to make it," or "This is too much. What are we doing here?" How are those conversations unfolding, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, any pre-programmed illusions that I had about the validity of our presence there was pretty much shattered by the time I deployed. so I never really had the existential dread of, is it worth it, or why are we here kind of thing. I just there doing my job. But yeah, man, I mean, mental attrition was the number one problem in our ranks. I mean, we had guys dropping like flies left and right, not just from physical wounds, but from just they couldn't hack it, which is totally understandable, because this isn't changing the world. We were just out there walking around getting shot at. And so, mental attrition was definitely, it was rampant in our ranks, and it picked guys off left and right. And there was a constant cycle of guys getting shipped out to do, less dangerous jobs or getting put on mayor cell or getting sent to a different posting, and then we would inherit fresh guys that would have to learn these lessons all over again. So by the end of the deployment, I mean, there was only a handful of dudes who actually made it through, either made it through without getting wounded or killed, or made it through without just having to bend the knee to that mental weight, which is understandable. I mean, that's something we've never created an atmosphere of like begrudgment or anger against those guys, because we all understood we were all there. Everybody reached their breaking point at some point. It's just a matter of, can you come back from that breaking point and still keep going?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much you recognized at the time, or were able to recognize at the time, the gravity of everything that you were going through and all of your platoon mates were going through, and whether it was starting to affect you, whether you could almost see the deterioration mentally of guys as it was going on.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely could. And, one of the things that kind of probably helped a lot of us is most of us didn't have a frame of reference. We didn't understand that we thought we were infantrymen. We thought this is your typical infantry deployment. And, we hear these deployments where people have had just terrible, terrible times, and you think, oh, this is what it is. This is just the job. And we didn't quite realize that the nature of the deployment was pretty, I mean, there's nothing exceptional about it, in that, it wasn't like Korengal in 2007. It was just, we were just out there stomping around, but it was a violent one. It was pretty thick. And this is something that I didn't really understand or realize until years later, when I talked to other veterans from other eras and different places, and in doing the podcast, it's helped us to realize it too. Like, it was an exceptionally violent period of time, but none of us had a frame of reference to realize that, except for a few folks, and they were smart enough to keep their traps shut, because they weren't going to be like, yeah, guys, this isn't how normally a deployment goes. So we you could see the in people's eyes, man. You could see guys just start to like give way, because it was getting hard.
In retrospect, do you wish that some of those guys who had the experience had spoken up?
Yeah, I mean, certainly at the time, and this was in 2012, so
right, the
atmosphere around mental health and stuff like that,
PTSD wasn't a thing back then.
Yeah, it was just starting to become like a conversation. It's at least in the military circles, and really for the nation. I mean, it was not really a part of the conversation, or if it was kind of this ostracized, media version of the crazy veteran who's like got a bunch of ammo and he's going to go blow something up, and that kind of bullshit image that gets pushed by Hollywood and the news media and things like that. So yeah, the conversations around that stuff was in its early stages, and there was a kind of a balancing act of like, I got to take care of myself, but at the same time, you didn't want to let your buddies down. There's no worse feeling in the world than not being on a patrol where somebody gets into a bad firefight, or God forbid somebody gets wounded. That feeling of not being there, it's going to overwhelm any sense of, I guess, self-preservation that's going to kick in, or any sense of like, mental difficulty, because you're not going to let yourself not do the job. Yeah. How does
that deployment end?
So that deployment ends. We fought right up to the very end. We had kind of a pinnacle moment in October 3rd and 4th. That was a bad one. Our platoon took a lot of casualties. Thankfully, no KIAs, just wounded. But those guys, we got pretty fucked up. It was a bad 2-day firefight. That was kind of a turning point. Me personally, I had a really rough time with that. Fortunately, the couple of weeks after that, things kind of subsided for a little bit. And I think in October, we got into a gunfight. And so from October till we left in December, it was probably 2 or 3 or 4 gunfights a week. It definitely slowed down a lot, but we fought right up to the very end, man. I mean, I think my last firefight was 48 hours before I was back at CAF and getting on a plane to get out of there.
How much of a relief do you feel when you get on that plane?
Oh, man. So, I remember walking to the back of the C-17 and looking out over the airfield there, and the sun was going down, and there's these craggy mountains in the distance. And it was beautiful, because Afghanistan's a beautiful country. It's austere and brutal, but it's beautiful. And I just remember looking at that and be like, set this in your mind, dude, because like you're almost out of here now. You never have that complete feeling of safety till you're completely back. But I was like, I'm actually done. Like, I think I survived this thing, And you might rewind the clock a few days. Like after that last firefight, we hopped in the strikers because there were places had strikers. We didn't, but we hopped in the back of the strikers. And I remember looking at one of my buddies and like, dude, it's like, if we get back from this without hitting an ID, we've made it. Like, we made it through, and then you get back to the cop and you're a little bit more secure and you're like, maybe we'll actually get out of here. And then you get on the Chinook. So it's just like this series of slowly letting go until you're finally back on the ground in the U.S. And that's, you're like, oh man, I survived. I mean, when I walked across the parade field and I saw my family and got embraced by my family, the first words out of my mouth was not, I missed you guys, whatever. I survived. So that was kind of a good moment. And it was striking that was the first thing that came to my mind whenever I finally got back into real life.
You go through all that and, you wonder how you kind of survived and made it out. When do you start to come to the realization that your experience there has sort of left an indelible mark on you and changed your sort of mental outlook on everything?
Yeah, good question, man. Honestly, for me, it was years. It was probably till we started making the podcast, which we started recording about a year ago. I think we started recording September last year,
right?
Because it was the first time in my life that I didn't have the next step. So when I got out, like, I applied for school in Afghanistan. I got into school. I went back to school. I loved it. I soaked it in. I got to, got to go to China and study. I got to, really enjoy that time. And then as soon as I was done with my undergrad, I went on to do my master's degree, and I got to live in Colorado and do that, and just like focusing.
By the way, just to cut you off so people know, you have a bachelor's degree in Chinese language and literature and a master's in Chinese literature. What is it about China that's fascinating you, bro?
Oh man, that's a long story. I'll give you the truncated version. Basically, when I decided to get out of the military, I knew I moved pretty quick. I wanted to do a master's degree. I thought I would go back to work for the government, maybe for an agency or something like that. And so part of that was I need to study Chinese because that's going to be the language that's going to make me sellable. Then I went back to school, started taking Chinese language, and decided to pick up the minor. And so I ended up taking a Chinese literature class that completely blew my mind. I mean, I've always been an avid reader and writer and just a participant in literature. I've always loved to read and write. And so to have that whole world open up for me was kind of something fresh and new and exciting. Again, it was another goal for me to pursue. And so
Chinese literature, are you reading it in Chinese or Mandarin, or is this translated to English you're reading?
So, I mean, when you first start out, you're reading it in translation, but by the time I got to my master's degree, we were reading it all in Chinese. And everything I focused on is at least 1,300 years old or older. So I'm reading it in classical Chinese, which is just a completely different language than modern Chinese, like grammatically, structurally, everything. So it was a good.
Read The Art of War then?
Yeah, I'm not. I know it's almost shameful. I have not. So yeah, I've read a lot of other stuff from that era, but I've just never went down that wormhole. I ended up getting pulled a bunch of different directions.
Strangely, you and I have something in common. I have also been to China.
Oh, really? Whereabouts?
Beijing. I was there as a 13-year-old kid.
Oh, really?
There to play baseball in a baseball tournament. There were, long story short, back when the first President Bush was president, he had some sort of program called like hand-to-hand sports. And it was basically sports teams from all over America who went to foreign countries to play sports against them. And they had 4 different American teams, one from the Midwest, one from the Southwest, one from the West, and one from the Northeast. And the guy who was in charge of the Northeast, who worked in DC, actually was from Long Island, where I grew up. So he went to Long Island, where he grew up, to put the team together. Just so happens it's where I lived, and they had a tryout for all the best kids. And I ended up making the team and got to spend 2 weeks in China, which was a real experience, especially at 13 years old. Yeah. Watch the dude eat a scorpion.
Yeah, I've had scorpion at the Beijing night market. It tastes like a oversalted kettle cooked potato chip.
No, I wouldn't know. I don't trust your judgment on that. I would not compare eating a scorpion to overcook anything. I'll take your word for it. Yeah, I mean, it was an experience for a 13-year-old kid. Beijing is a different part of the world. So
yeah, and especially then, man. I mean, if you were there at that time, Beijing then versus
1990, 1991.
Oh wow,
in that time frame.
China has changed so much since then. I'm almost guilty of your chance to see it before it really started to explode.
It's crazy, man. And one other quick story I'll never forget at the opening ceremonies that we had there. One of our guys, I guess he was a translator, whatever, was at our table, and they brought out a duck similar to what you see at the end of A Christmas Story. Head on it and all.
Yeah.
Then, and dude took a chopstick, put it right in the brain, popped it open, started eating the brain. I'm like, yeah, I'm good.
It's probably Beijing
for me, thanks.
Probably some Beijing cow. Yeah, Beijing
Yeah.
roasted duck. It's classic.
Anyway, we digress. So you end up finishing school. I'm sorry we got off on that tangent, but you end up finishing school. And so, you talk about kind of just to get us back on track here, when you were recognizing that, that your service was sort of catching up with you mentally.
Yeah. So, like I said, I'd always had that next goal. I'd had my relationship with my now wife that kind of like, as soon as I got out of the Army, we started dating. So I was able to fully invest myself into that next step. So the transition was not difficult for me. I finished my master's in May of 2020, and then I wanted to continue school. I decided to steer out of the PhD skid because I didn't want to go down that funnel. And so I wanted to get a degree in creative writing instead. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to get into the programs where my wife got in for her PhD. So we prioritized her PhD over my second master's. And so I didn't have a goal. I had to basically enter the real world after 7 years of being in school. And so that transition for me was 8 years removed. And so it co-aligned with the beginning of the podcast. And as we begin to explore those, especially those first few early episodes of the podcast, is when I began to kind of ruminate and reflect on it and really start to kind of dig up the stuff that I had compartmentalized and suppressed and confront those memories and start to understand on a more kind of intuitive, philosophical, whatever, personal, soulful level, how those formative experiences and memories really shaped the man I've become. And continue to become, and so instead of having them be the skeleton in the closet, I was able to air them out and just kind of start siphoning through everything, picking out the good that I needed to carry forward with me, because there's a lot of positives that come out of those experiences, and dealing with the bad. So yeah, prolonged, but.
Was there a moment for you, and an analogy for those civilians listening? I mean, where you actually remember you start talking for the first time about this? It's you walk out to the ledge, right? You're on that 10-meter platform diving board. You walk out to the edge and you stare over and you look down and you start to realize how deep the water is. And then you start thinking, maybe I don't need to go. Maybe I don't need to make this leap. Maybe I can just walk back. And you kind of just try to talk yourself out of it. But it's really that first leap that sort of opens the floodgates. Was there that moment for you?
Yeah, that's a good analogy to put it. I think it's probably a couple of things. I mean, I'd always gotten onto the first few rungs of that ladder, right? I would have a few beers and I'd start talking to especially a professor of mine who I was really became good friends with. He's my undergrad advisor. We'd be drinking beer in China, and I'd end up telling him just war stories and stuff, and just like not really war stories and thumping my chest and like, look how much of a badass I am, but just actually airing this stuff out, getting it out there. And nothing traumatic or crazy, just the fun stuff, just to kind of test the waters, if you will. But I'd never mentioned anything to, like I said, even my immediate family, I didn't say a word to about any of the actual stories themselves. So, but the kind of waterfall moment for me was, there was two things at the beginning of the podcast. One, when we first started launching the Kickstarter stuff, I was looking through some pictures, and there's a picture of Curtis, and he talked about where he got shot in the backpack. And by that point in the deployment, he and I were the only two dudes left in our squad that either hadn't gotten blown up, shot, or quit. And so our room was pretty empty, And when he got shot to that backpack, and he almost got killed, basically. And I saw those pictures where he's showing up, and you can see his camelback where it's been shot and it's leaked out. And I had a panic attack, and I've never had a panic attack before in my entire life. It just hit me like a brick wall out of nowhere. And because I had this thought of like, what if Curtis had been killed? Because he's one of my best friends, and that kind of catapulted in a matter of like 2 seconds into me, like breathing really heavy. I was like freaking out. I didn't know what the hell was going on. And so that was kind of the moment, like, okay, dude, it's time to start approaching this stuff in a more structured and kind of useful environment. And then the second thing that really that catapulted me into exploring those memories more was on the podcast, our third episode. We were still fresh into it, and we were still talking to guys in our immediate vicinity. So it was all really a little bit more tender, a little bit more fresher. So we were talking to our old PL, and we talked about that big operation in October. And that was kind of like this cathartic moment for me to just like actually tell what that day did to my mind, and to to get that out on the page, if you will, and then start to reconstruct on the back end was definitely helpful for me. So, it's been good to confront that stuff. And, it might take years. Some guys, they deal with it 6 months and they get back. Some guys, it takes a decade. Some guys, it might be 20, 30 years before stuff like this starts popping up, but it's always there and it's always going to come up and get you.
How much of a domino effect has the podcast? And again, it's the Panjwai Podcast. If you guys don't remember, and you can check them out, the panjwaipodcast.com. But how much of the podcast creates a domino effect for not only you, but people who come on it where, you share a memory, they share a memory. And next thing you know, you're starting to uncover things that you didn't really remember, or didn't really realize until you start getting into the depths of these conversations.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's happened multiple times. Because not only is it a domino effect within our dudes, our guys that we were there with, but their families, their loved ones, their friends, and even other guys who are different eras, different units, different areas are listening, and they're queuing in and sending us a message or whatever, just talking about how something, either helped them along or whatever. It's helped to fill the gap in our memories. It's amazing how much stuff you forget. And, combat is a matter of inches, like we talked about earlier, with the rounds getting close, or the unit that's on the other side of the wall, the guy who's 5 feet away, he's getting his shit kicked in when you are more or less protected behind cover. So to hear the different perspectives of the guys, there's moments that are pivotal for some guys that I completely forgotten. Our PL had a story about a dude who was putting in an IED and got hit with a Hellfire, and his nephew or something had him back on those little 3-wheeled buggy things. We stopped him because we had him on the ISR, and he was talking about the experience of being there, watching this guy bleed out. And I was 10 feet away watching the same thing, but it didn't have that same impact on me. And I'd completely forgotten about it until he mentioned that. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. But for him, it was formative because he was right there with this dude. I had enough distance to where it got washed into the background of all the other memories that have occurred from that time.
I mean, I could tell you from doing several hundred of these episodes, one of the best feelings that we get from, is when a guest turns around and says, I've never told that story before, or I can't believe I just remembered that until now. When you hit that spot with them where it just sort of opens up something that they didn't know that they were feeling or didn't know that they had in them. And that's truly part of the catharsis of our podcast and your podcast, is to get to those spots with people, because it's uncovering all that stuff that we've packed down in for so long, that finally comes up to the surface, that we really can get to the heart of some of the issues that people are dealing with.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I mean, that's been a central ethos to our podcast, and it's something that every guest is taken away from it. And we do pre-interviews where we'll talk for a few hours, and sometimes those pre-interviews will be 4 or 5 hours, and we'll just kind of have a mini therapy session where we're all just kind of work it out and get those memories out there and stuff, and talk and just air it out. And yeah, it's the most rewarding thing, hands down, has been to shine the light on these guys who need to have their story told, and they deserve to have their story much more than Curtis and I do. I mean, we some of the guys that we deploy with have did some phenomenal stuff there that kind of escapes the ability for me to convey. So but for them to sit down and finally talk about it and get it out there in the open, and people to see the tenacity that some of these dudes had, and the bravery and courage get thrown around a lot, but there's they're not just platitudes. There's some validity to those labels. So
no, yeah, and as it pertains to combat, like you say, bravery and courage get thrown a lot, but much similar to the definition of porn. When you see it, bravery when you see it, courage when you see it. Honestly, in combat, there's a certain amount of, I wouldn't do that shit. There's a certain amount of, it happens, and after it's what we think, dude.
Yeah.
So there is some of that, but I certainly understand, and I asked this to Curtis, and I'm curious to get your perspective again, Curtis Grace, who is the other half of the Panjwai podcast that we had here on the Hazard Ground. What do you want this podcast to be? Where do you want it to go? Sort of what's the grand, apex of this?
Sure. For me, I'll reflect most of what Curtis said, just having that kind of document that you can turn people towards. For me, if it's a way for somebody who doesn't want to talk about something, directly with a loved one or a spouse or a wife or a parent or whatever, send them our direction so that they can get a better sense of the experience. You know, as far as the Apex thing, I want it to be a part of a larger narrative that's emerging right now. You know, we're fortunate as veterans of this conflict in that we've ended up in a culture that not only has a proliferation of media for us to express these stories in, but also a culture that's ready to hear it and they want to hear it. People want to hear these stories, you know, families and loved ones, and even people, complete strangers, they want to hear them. It's not like Vietnam where those guys were treated like shit when they got back. This is a culture that's receptive. It's a culture that's slowly beginning to open itself up to the narrative around mental health, maybe to a fault to some degrees. But you know, it's a culture that is ready to hear it. And so we're fortunate in that if we can archive this podcast and it can be a part of the larger narrative of veterans out of Iraq and Afghanistan, then that's awesome. And especially if it contributes to something, if it helps one guy, if it helps one family member find solace, or if it helps one guy keep from, you know, thinking those dark thoughts or tumbling down the dark rabbit hole of addiction or something, that's worth it to us.
Yeah. And again, I'll tell you the same thing I told Curtis. The other benefit to doing this that neither your podcast nor ours had ever thought about when we started doing this is we're chronicling history.
Yeah.
Forever. I mean, the Panjwai province will be forever being told in the first person point of view because of your podcast. There are hundreds of stories that we told, and hopefully hundreds and thousands more on this podcast that we'll tell, that will forever be told by the individuals who lived through it. And that's a pretty awesome thing that we ended up doing that we never really set out to do when we started.
Yeah. And, you know, my hope is that one day it'll be as valid of a medium that in the eyes of the academics or the eyes of, say, the Library of Congress, that they start compiling and cataloging this stuff so that it's on hand, you know?
Yeah. I hope the Library of Congress calls me.
Yeah. I mean, maybe not anytime soon, but maybe in 30 years, you know,
it'll be an interesting conversation, to say the least. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something that Curtis and I would love to see other guys do, come out. You know, I think the way we structured it, not by any design, it's just kind of accidentally ended up being that way, but by focusing on a specific area, it's allowed for a lot of continuity across totally different eras and different armies, the Canadian Army even.
Right. Yeah.
It's a lot of continuity to come across the experience of combat there.
A couple of final things here as we record this. The events of the last 72 hours have unfolded about Afghanistan on TV. I'm sure it has torn off a Band-Aid that was covering some old wounds. So, one, how are you doing with all of it? And two, what are your thoughts?
On a intellectual level, I'm doing fine because intellectually we've anticipated this, right? For months. I mean, Panjwai fell months ago, back in November, and Kandahar, more or less, with the exception of the city, fell months ago. And we've had a lot of contact with people on the ground, like interpreters, Afghan army, people in the government. They've actually sent us messages telling us what's actually going on months ago. So we saw the writing on the wall intellectually. Emotionally, it's disheartening to see because we all know the cost that it's taken, not just, I mean, you see the numbers of $1 trillion and 2,000 some odd KIA. It's not just that, it's the millions and millions of families that have been affected, American and Afghan. You know, we, as I think our society, we get a little bit navel gazely and we forget that there's 36 million Afghans that are being affected by this right now too, much more tragically and devastatingly than we will ever be affected by it. And so, you know, it's disheartening to see the way it's turned out. It's not a surprise. And, you know, we've actually been in contact with a couple of people that are in Kabul, literally at the gates of the airport trying to get in. We've been funneling their information to people that we think can help them maybe. And, you know, we're trying to do what we can. But the focus for me is the Afghan people, on one front, because, you know, I really feel for the girls. That's the part that breaks my heart, because when I was there, you see these beautiful girls, you know, they'd be 10, 12 years old, and, you know, they're doomed to a life of indentured servanthood. And now the little girls who were going to school and had somewhat of a future in Kabul, it's not going to be there, not to the extent that it was going to be. So that's disheartening for me to see. And then the other aspect of that, and then I'll shut up, is the veteran community. You know, you can't take it personally. The decisions and the series of mistakes and or victories that led to this is so far beyond the capacity for a veteran to do anything about. To take it so personally to the point where it becomes a mental degradation for you, you can't do that. You can't take that on your shoulders. It's not your job.
Well, remember, you were only going there for a finite period of time to begin with.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so in a year, you could only accomplish so much. You weren't saving Afghanistan in one calendar year.
Yeah. And if you were an E3 with a saw, you sure as fuck weren't saving Afghanistan in a calendar year. You know, like you were just there.
Probably were destroying more of it as an E3 with the saw.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, but, you know, just got to remember, you know, the question that keeps popping up is, was it worth it? And when Panjwai started to fall, we had a conversation about, was it worth it? And we land on the topic or the idea that, yeah, it was worth it because, you know, for a finite period of time, some of Afghanistan had a secure, stable life, and they've got a taste of what, you know, semblances of freedom can look like. And you know, it was worth it for us in that those experiences can shape you in ways that are incredibly beneficial to your mind and to your outlook and to your life, so that you have a measure by which to compare the adversity you face in the real world that it will never surmount. You know, the things we face in the civilian world are, you know, they're different. It's different struggles, different difficulties, but they'll never be as difficult as getting through that 9 months, that 12 months, that 18 months in Afghanistan.
I'm with you. All I can tell you, the unit I trained, when I left, they were trained. I can't speak to how much beyond my time there they were able to be efficient or anything else, or what my successors did after that, what they changed. All I know, for the 12 months that I was there, I impacted the lives of several Iraqi soldiers and their families in a positive manner. And that's the only thing I could put in my back pocket. Left it all out on the battlefield, literally and figuratively. I left it all out there. And that's enough for me. But I will say one other thing, and it's that photo of the 650 Afghans on a C-17 just sitting on the ground.
Isn't that phenomenal?
Yeah, no frequent flyer miles for them, not wearing their seatbelt. But I mean, here's what I'm still grappling with that I can't wrap my head around. Where are you sitting right now, like city-wise?
I'm in a little town in Kentucky.
Okay. Imagine, and just wrap your head around this. Imagine that you get up one morning and you have quickly come to the realization that things are so bad. You immediately leave your house, drive to the nearest airport with zero worldly possessions next to you, take your entire family and get on any plane going anywhere, because living in a foreign country that you've never been to is now a better option than where you are right now. I don't know if Americans can grasp that concept. I mean, imagine, Luke, just running to the airport right now and getting on a plane to Bolivia, knowing you may never get back to Kentucky or America, with nothing in your back pocket other than your wallet, and your whole family goes with you, or as many people as you can get. I'm still struggling with reconciling. And if that doesn't capture the essence of what the Taliban is, then I don't know what does.
Yeah, and people need to be aware. Don't let them fool us into thinking that they're legitimate state actors now. They're still evil.
They'll say all the right things right now publicly.
Yeah, they're running a serious PR campaign right now. But in 3 months,
it's going to be walk. Yeah, right.
Yeah, 3 months when nobody cares, they're going to be beheading people and
walking with one night, but it wasn't last night. That's for darn sure.
No, I mean, yeah, it's a hard. That's definitely an impossible thing for us to grasp, because we haven't had to face any semblance of that in 100 years. I mean, the Great Depression was the last time people did that, and even then, it wasn't overnight.
Sure.
So our version of reality is very far removed from that. So it's difficult for Americans to wrap their mind around that. Even Americans who have been there and seen that place.
100%. Any favorite stories from the podcast that you particularly like more than others that people need to check out?
I mean, yeah, there's some good ones out there. Our buddy Tom Evans, we did a 2-parter for him. Those are good episodes, because he is such a stellar individual and a phenomenal soldier. And he did a lot of good work while he was there. The interview we did with our second PL, the 3rd episode, that one's pretty heavy. It's a rough one to get through, but it's good because it shows how the fractures that start to occur as a result of those experiences can can turn into some dark stuff, and how to rebound from that and have a successful life on the back end. So that, getting your shit together on the back end of breaking is definitely the theme on episode 3. So those 2 are good, and just kind of scan through them and check them out, and whatever sticks out to people, or whatever jobs they're interested in, or whatever. We've interviewed medics, we've interviewed tankers, we've interviewed Apache and Kiowa pilots, and we got more coming down. We're going to be we've interviewed one guy that was part of Operation Medusa, which is a big operation to take Panjwai 2006. We'll be interviewing another guy, Rusty Bradley, who wrote the book Lines of Kandahar, which is about that whole operation. We'll be interviewing him here soon. That'll be at the end of season 2. So a lot of good stuff coming up.
Well, again, the PanjwaiPodcast.com is where you can go to check out the website. You can get it anywhere you get podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, YouTube, Podbean. Just a great series, guys, that you need to check out. And we're certainly excited for what you guys have coming up. And we want to support the hell out of you guys. I mean, this is just an incredible work that you're doing. And together we can Voltron of podcasts and create something fantastic. But we wish you nothing but continued success with the Panjwai podcast.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. And ditto to Hazard Grounds, man. I'm going to start raffling through your catalog and listen to some episodes.
Yeah, we have a few there, but probably some guys you may or may not know along the way. We always like to find that connectivity. But
yeah, I think I'm going to take the plunge on the Cop Keating episodes.
It's always a good place to start. There's a lot of authenticity there. There's a lot of realness there, and no disrespect to Jake Tapper or anybody else who's made a movie or a book about this, but as you well know, the E-Force perspective doesn't sugarcoat much.
Yeah, right. That sounds good.
You'll see plenty of honesty there. Well, again, we thank you for your time. Certainly appreciate you spending some time with us. Continued success with the Pantry Podcast. But Luke Coffey, thank you so much for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Killcliffe's Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.